Despite the development of new drugs for hepatitis C virus, treatment rates in the United States have remained low. In 2023, the Biden administration unveiled a national plan to eliminate HCV. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Joey Mattingly, an associate professor in the Department of Pharmacotherapy at the University of Utah College of Pharmacy. Dr. Mattingly has co-authored a perspective article about advancing HCV elimination efforts. Dr. Mattingly, could you describe the types of drugs that have been developed for HCV in recent years? How do they differ from previously available treatments?
Since around 2011, we've had several new direct-acting antivirals developed, several lauded as blockbuster drugs compared to prior medications that were predominantly ribavirin and interferon-based therapies. These direct-acting antivirals came with a much higher sustained virologic response rate, or sort of a clinical cure, as we like to call it, but patients were able to get to that quote-unquote clinical cure at a much higher rate with these new drugs, particularly by 2013 when Sovaldi and Harvoni came on the market from Gilead Sciences.
So, given those advantages that you talk about, why haven't treatment rates been higher?
One of the biggest challenges when these drugs first came out was the shock of the initial sticker price. Now, I've been studying this space since 2014. And these drugs, while when you look at $1,000 a pill, I think were the first articles that came out when Harvoni hit the market. While it sounds high, when you think about $90,000 for a course of treatment, compared to the older therapies and compared to the risk of a patient eventually maybe having compensated or decompensated cirrhosis, hepatocellular carcinoma, any of these major events later in life, the $90,000 price tag for a one-time cure was actually cost effective. The problem is that cost effectiveness doesn't represent affordability. That's what we have to look at, the budget. So whenever we actually look at what would it cost to then treat everyone with hepatitis C at those market prices, the budget was just too high. And so you saw a lot of challenges with both private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, the prison system. From a budget standpoint, it's been very problematic and very challenging to afford to pay for all those treatments. That's one aspect of it. And obviously, then the other complication then becomes the diagnosis, testing, treatment, engaging patients to know to get tested. So there is a more, not just the drug, it can be a more nuanced challenge as well.
So, with all of that, what does the Biden administration's plan to eliminate HCV look like?
So the Biden administration has a multi-pronged plan. So it's not just about the drug. It's really incorporating, identifying, and having a health campaign, engaging patients and communities, trying to inform patients and communities of their risk and whether it makes sense to get tested, incorporate large, widespread point of care diagnostic testing. And then if someone's positive, then getting them treated, which is the pharmacotherapy component of it. This is very similar to other country elimination treatment strategies, so definitely a multi-pronged approach.
You say in your perspective article that under this plan to eliminate HCV in the United States would cost about $24 billion. So, what's that figure based on?
We try to use conservative estimates. So I mentioned the $90,000 treatment price tag, but that was in 2014. And prices actually have come down. I would say that the competition in this space with multiple manufacturers has helped the net price of the drug, meaning the list price minus any pharmaceutical manufacturer rebates that may be given to a payer, gets that per person cost around $10,000 for the course of treatment. So roughly $5,000 per month for like a 2-month regimen, maybe on the conservative side. Some patients may require 3 months of treatment, could vary between 10 and $15,000 or $20,000 per person at the current market rates. And then if we estimate that there are approximately 2.4 million people living with chronic HCV, and again, one of the challenges is that with early stages of the disease, it's often a silent illness. A lot of patients may not know that they have the disease. That's why that engagement and testing component is so critical. But if we estimate that that's what it would take to get all of those current patients treated, and then obviously ongoing, we're kind of fighting new infections and trying to reduce new infections. We're estimating that at a minimum, we would probably see a $24 billion investment using those current prices.
In your article, you outline several strategies that you think would help provide widespread access to these treatments at the lowest possible price. How would those approaches work?
So in our article, and one of the things we want to be very clear that we believe that the drugs are cost effective at the market prices. So it's important, again, as I was talking about, is that cost effectiveness is really about treatment A versus treatment B. Is treatment A more efficient? Is it lower cost over a long period of time compared to treatment B? That's not the same as the budget. So if you want to keep the budget impact to a minimum, then you've got to get that per unit cost down even lower. And so we're not arguing that the government use some heavy-handed approach. We're actually recommending the government act like a business, use a market-based strategy. And so we've identified three different potential solutions. So first, the government can outreach to all 6 manufacturers that have currently marketed or have previously marketed direct-acting antivirals. Start there. So it's not just the current market. Just to recap for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with this market, currently Gilead and AbbVie, so 2 manufacturers, maintain the most successful, the guideline recommended treatments. So these are brand name Epclusa by Gilead and brand name Mavyret by AbbVie. These are the 2 guideline kind of leading market drugs, and each representing about 1.5 billion in sales in 2023. So still profitable products that are viable. But there are other manufacturers like Merck, Bristol Myers Squibb, Janssen, and Vertex have all engaged in research in hepatitis C and have all brought direct-acting virals to the market. So why not start with outreaching to all 6 first and just seeing what can be done to work with those companies to potentially license one of their products and then grant manufacturing rights to multiple companies to essentially bring these drugs to generic prices. Second, if manufacturers aren't interested in this type of a partnership, the government could actually explore the possibility of acquiring the patents for a direct-acting antiviral, particularly those with little market value. In the past, I've written about different pathways government could take in terms of acquiring a patent. Here we're saying use a market-based approach, like look to purchase the patent the same way Gilead purchased the intellectual property for Sovaldi. Famously, I believe in 2011, they acquired that asset for around $11 billion. So a for-profit entity could do this same thing. So now if you're looking to buy the asset, you would ask, all right, well, what's the value of the asset? Well, to Gilead and AbbVie, their products are producing sales of about 1.5 billion a year in revenue, so that their assets would be considered larger or higher. But to the other products, like, for example, Merck's Zepatier, this drug is a single pill once a day, 3-month therapy. There are some challenges with it in terms of whether it can cover all the genotypes, so it may be limited to genotypes, but the primary genotype it does cover is the most common in the US. Merck's drug, while it's still on the market, has virtually no revenue. So you're talking about an asset that's producing no revenue for this company. So if I were the government, I would start with a phone call to Merck and I would say, what would it be worth for us to buy this asset from you? Merck, on the plus side, would get an infusion of cash in the current quarter or whatever the assets purchased that they could then use to invest in other research. And that's good for their shareholders. And then the government would have an asset that they could then work with generic manufacturers or low-cost manufacturers to then manufacture the product at scale. Finally, the least desirable option, and we wanted to just be comprehensive in our article. Essentially, the government could wait until the key patents expire. So we anticipate between 2027 and 2030, we'll start seeing a lot of patents expiring for these products. We just think that this is the least desirable given that we have patients today that need treatment. But we did want to be comprehensive for the article.
Besides the high cost of these newer drugs, what factors impede access to treatment? You mentioned the absence of a diagnosis, for example. And then what steps could policymakers take to address those barriers?
Of course, the awareness has got to be one of the biggest challenges. And this is where I do think it's advantageous for the government to work hand in hand with drug manufacturers, because one thing we've learned is that since the 1960s, drug manufacturers are incredibly effective at marketing their products. They're incredibly effective at communicating the value of their products to customers. We allow direct to consumer advertising in the United States. We know drug companies are good at that. So why wouldn't we work with manufacturers to get the word out and to get the word to as many patients as possible to get tested and get point of care testing widespread? So here's maybe one of the challenges that's important to think through is that in the United States, we have Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance are 3 big buckets of payers for care. If the government focuses solely on the cost it's paying in Medicare and Medicaid, one challenge might be, well, what happens to the private insurers? Like, what prices can the big three PBMs that maintain about 85% of the private insurance pharmacy benefit market, what prices are they going to get? Like, are they going to still be paying that $10,000 a treatment number? If so, that could be a barrier. That could be a barrier for the private insurance market. So it's really important, I think, that we do everything we can to get the per unit cost so low that any payer would be crazy not to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, we want patients, when they go to their pharmacy, that everything's approved, and ideally that their out-of-pocket cost is zero. Because for us, getting treatment is more valuable than them delaying treatment because they can't afford it out-of-pocket costs. So, because again, every patient that has this virus is potentially someone who could spread the virus to someone else. So it's not the same as, say, hypertension or something where your delay in treatment may only directly affect your direct health, but you may actually impact someone else's health with a communicable disease.
Finally, what do you think is going to happen to the government's plan under the next administration? Is HCV elimination going to remain a priority?
While I can't necessarily speak to whether it would be as high of a priority, and it's hard to speculate whether certain programs would be sort of brushed off as, oh, that's a Biden thing, so maybe the Trump administration doesn't want to touch it because they don't see any value in it. In this particular area, I don't see this as being a partisan issue. This seems to be a no-brainer kind of issue in terms of like, hey, we have patients with an infectious disease. Why don't we get them cured? So I could see the Trump administration tackling this, especially if you think about our approaches. Like, we're not advocating for anything out of the ordinary that a strong business person would do. So we're talking about negotiating at the table in the strongest possible way. And if the next president, someone who prided himself on being a great negotiator, sees something like this, maybe our optimism might be maybe the Trump administration would see these types of approaches and say, yeah, like, let's negotiate really hard. Let's go to the market and we'll say, if these two drug companies won't play at the table, what's our next best opportunity, and bring that price down to generic prices. So it's early to tell, but the optimist in me believes that this won't fall off the radar.
Thank you, Dr. Mattingly.